So I transitioned to live right as Dave crashed.
Oh,
Or he lost his camera or something.
oh,
Oh,
that's amazing.
So I was thinking, guys, next time we go live, I should get out my electronic wind instrument. I should like record like some theme music or something.
Have it mower sound activated.
So who do we have with us this week? You know, what's funny is we can't see who we have with us this week because I keep losing. Nick, can you stop sharing your screen for just a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
See if that helps.
Maybe.
Because everything was working fine until we went live, and then all of a sudden we don't have Nick Craver
Everything's
anymore.
broken.
Everything's broken.
Well, mine's still not working. What is happening?
I blame it on the neighbor's lawnmower.
I think
Right?
that's probably what it was.
Oh, you can't click the button. You have to click the text below the button to stop.
Yeah,
Come
it's
on,
a really-
Skype.
It's a really bad
All
user experience.
There we go. Does that help?
So as everybody's tuned in now for our weekly episode of Fighting with Skype for 10 minutes. So who do we have with us?
We have Nick Craver. If you've used Stack Overflow at all, you've probably heard Nick's name. I'd also like to take this opportunity to point out that there is indeed a space between the words stack and overflow.
Oh, but it's a zero width space. It's a zero width space.
It's NBSP.
Yep. So maybe we'll let Nick give a brief intro for folks who don't know Nick. Maybe Nick could just explain, what it is that he does over at Stack Overflow.
God, if someone figures it out, they should tell me.
What does everybody do at Stack Overflow?
So
They copy
we
and paste answers, right? Sorry.
all day long. All day long. We've got some bugs around that. So I've been here about 10 years. It'll be about 10 years in January, I guess. So I do a little bit of everything, little wildcard, little dev, little SRE, design, PM, not design features and PMs, definitely not design. And we just kind of keep the gears running, right? So when we are designing new systems, new features going out, we help the other teams with that. Sometimes it's kind of like janitor duty, cleaning up whether, fail in the background. And a lot of things we do, if we're doing our job right, you don't see it, right? You don't know about it. Anything from attacks to new feature rollout ports to .NET Core, for example. If you don't see it live other than us tweeting about it, good. We've done our job well, right? So we try and keep everything running silently. It's probably the best description.
Yeah, I think silently is the key there. And I know, I've been following your tweets fairly closely over the last couple of years, and I know there was a big .NET Core migration that happened. Maybe that's where we should start with this conversation, because you had mentioned running silently, no disruptions to service. I have to imagine that the migration to .NET Core was a massive undertaking.
Yeah, it's pretty big. So it actually starts years ago, right? We were not ready to port Stack Overflow to .NET Core, both in company priority type of situation, as well as it's a big thing. And you've got to start with your dependencies, right? If your packages that you're using from NuGet in .NET don't work, you can't compile. You're stopped there. And we maintain some of the largest packages for .NET, right? Dapper, Stack Exchange Redis, Mini Profiler. These sort of things were the first ones to move, not for us, but to enable the world to move. This was, back in project.json, rest in peace. That era was when we ported these, and we fought for it, and then they moved to MS Build and CS Proj stuff, and we're like, yeah, it was right. It was the right move. So that was where it started early on, and then moving Stack Overflow itself probably started in earnest about 18 months ago. And we've had about a person and a half full time on it. It's like the only thing we're doing. We're helping other teams, moving other stuff along. So it was kind of a constant effort to move the base layers up to be compatible with .NET Core, and then you move the actual external user-facing things to .NET Core. So we can talk through any of that parts you want. It's interesting. You have to order it and stack it and compile both things, and there's bits you have to fight to make it work in the old and new world, because ASP.NET specifically was rewritten, right? You had .NET Core 1.0, which we're just going to pretend that didn't happen, right? And they just rewrote everything. And you're like, you want to port? And, you could greenfield, but if you wanted to port, you quickly found out that was not going to be a good experience. And then 2.0, that was a big lesson learned. Went back, full compat, and you could move a lot of stuff over, right? Now ASP.NET is the exception to that. ASP.NET was still a rewrite. All the primitives are different. HTTP context different. Requests different. Everything throughout the stack, right? So that you can't really have like one library down bottom used for multiple web apps that is for both. You need to compile one or the other, right? And so that's where we found some challenges. How do you share code between some of these things? And where you kind of had layering sins, like basically most of your time spent in regret, I would say, when you're reporting, or hacks, right? You're
Wait,
like,
wait, wait. Did you say regret? Because I thought you were going to say regression testing.
No. So you regret ever doing that. You're like, hey, we worked around it here. I'm like, okay, but if you worked around it, this is not a use case that the people building the framework probably took into consideration when making it easy to upgrade, right?
Right.
So when I would say, and I've told a couple of people this, if you're off the beaten path, the brush grew up and you're going to need to take a machete with you. Like, it's going to hurt. If you're on the beaten path, it's a fairly straightforward upgrade. And most people are, right? Most people are not Stack Overflow scale. They don't have, there's certain issues, right? There's things we hit and there's scale things we hit. Most of the scale things are actually kind of built in, right? We used to have our own routing. We used to have our own pattern matching. We used to have localization handling for weird URLs in IS. We just nuked all that. All that's great. It just works now, right? That's beautiful stuff. The things you hit specific to your business logic, it's like, oh, well, down here it takes a request and it goes all the way down or something, right? Maybe it's a HTML string or something. And I have this model that just renders like a little div we use everywhere. Oh God, how do I share that between two different versions now? Because that HTML string, even that basic type is different now. So that's where I think a lot of the fun kind of creeped in. And we had to like design and architect, and we just hopped on a hangout for like 2 days. Like, what about this? What about that interface? What if we do this? And we finally found a way to layer it that works. And this is something we really got to blog about. Samo, Prolog on my team, he finally cracked that nut to get it stacked and layered. Yeah.
So I have a question. What primarily were you migrating in ASP.NET? Right? What app model? Was it MVC? Was it
All MVC.
web forms? You know.
No. Oh, come on. Yeah, all MVC.
So now the next question is, are you going to be porting over like in the next 18 months to Blazor?
What's Blazor? No. Blazor's a good model. It's it is a everything's got its use case, right? And Blazor is just not a very good fit for us. Plus, it would be a whole lot of effort for what a lot of Stack Overflow. If you think about the use case, you hit, you view, you bounce, you leave. Our mission is to get you the answer as quickly as possible and get out of there. Blazor is very, very heavy if you're not going to stick around. I would say is a good way of thinking about it, because the DLLs and everything, it's like, even in terms of CDN cost, it would cost us, I think we ran the numbers, it'd be like 60 times more to serve a Blazor app if most of our traffic is a hit and go before the cache changes.
That's interesting. I never really thought about Stack Overflow in the way that you just described it, like how you try to get people to answer as quickly as possible. Do you guys have like an SO bot? Like maybe I want to text a question on my phone and get answers. That'd be cool.
There is an API. I can tell you about outages calls from that. We have a full-fledged API. You can use it. You can use it for your personal stuff, accessing like your inbox and things as well, authenticated. But you can do a lot unauthenticated, OAuth, that kind of stuff. And we integrate with Teams and Slack, and Jira now, and some others we're working on. So like you can do /search in Slack and search your knowledge instance, whether it's programming or whatever. That's for their teams. We have a couple of different deployment models, right? We have SO, which is huge, and then we've got your private area, your team, and you need a way into that, right?
Yep.
And it's important most people don't realize that Stack Overflow, the main app, is not different from like bicycles.stackexchange. Very tiny site comparison. Yep. It's all multi-tenant. It's all one exe running. And it just, chooses a database, chooses a style sheet, and comes back out. And that needs about 4 gig to run on a web server. Like it's very low overhead, so it works pretty well.
So to clarify that, you're running all of Stack Exchange as a multi-tenant app. It's all one instance. Wow. I had no idea.
That's for awesome. Q&A, there's a few other apps, like the API is a different app StackExchange.com, the top level, you'll notice looks very different. That is an older app that we will eventually figure out how to integrate. And there's a couple little tiny domains for just special purposes. But with .NET Core, we can actually fold some of those in as middleware and eliminate a deploy and a build and all this and artifacts and all that kind of stuff, which is pretty cool. So for example, if you go to Stack Overflow and you ask a JavaScript question, you can put CSS and JavaScript and HTML and click run as a sample, right? And your browser does it, just like JS Fiddle or something.
Yeah.
So that needs another domain for security. Currently, that's a very, very tiny app with one controller and one view because it needed to be. Now it can be middleware. So one of the things we'll do in the next couple of months is like fold that in and just eliminate a project, eliminate a deploy. So that kind of stuff is neat use cases to me.
That's
Cutting
awesome.
down the weight.
I think it's funny that I've spoken with many people throughout the the developer conference scene, and we'll have conversations about Stack Overflow, and many of them don't understand that Stack Exchange has all of those other sites. Like you mentioned bicycles specifically, but it's really interesting that like you start showing them some of those little niche use cases and other apps that are out there, and they're like, "Whoa, I had no idea this existed."
Yeah, I think there's 375 databases on that cluster, so there's about half that many sites. Every site has a meta or discussion area about how to evolve that site, what the community wants to be, and we call them verticals, right? This is vertical for cooking, and I feel terrible right now. There's a ton of them. Bicycles, cooking, Bitcoin, gaming. Like there's just so many.
How do you come up with a new one?
So this has changed over time. Traditionally, the community pitches them. And then when they get enough followers, one of the things they learned with Stack Overflow, we actually designed the network to be like Stack Overflow is the first big thing, and anything could be the next big thing. Architecturally, it's designed that way where you could branch it off and give it its own server cluster or something. That never really happened. SO dwarfs the rest of the network. SO is basically one-to-one with everything else added together in terms of scale. So super user, server fault, those we launched early. We said, okay, these were things that we think the world needs. And then later on, the community, there's a site called Area 51, and we're not doing this so much right now, but they would pitch an idea and get enough critical mass. So you don't have enough people visiting it, a site withers and dies. It can't sustain itself with Q&A, right? So the model was to get enough followers to commit to it, and then they would launch a site and see how it worked. And some have come and gone over the years, and the ones around now and some are super healthy. We have there's like 2 different math sites, one for graduate level, one for lower level. Both have like 1 million+ questions, right?
Wow.
We have a really interesting question. I want to make sure we get to this in the chat. LQDev1 asks, Nick, how have you achieved such low overhead, and what challenges did you encounter?
Don't do what you don't need to do and apply that everywhere. Just keep it. So keep it stupid simple is a core tenet of SO infrastructure approaches to everything we do, right? Don't over-engineer. Don't under-engineer, right? In terms of don't back yourself into a corner, but past that, leave it open, right? Don't over-architect things. Are you caching something before you need to? And it's not premature optimization. That's what I'm talking about. A lot of times people just do more work to do in operation than they need to. Like take a little more time to simplify it back in the spec phase. I think this is something that a lot of devs could get a lot better at over time. They think, a lot of people say, we did the simplest thing that works. No. That's not usually, they did the first thing that works. And that's very different, right? Back off and question the complexity of the thing, right? Is the feature that's being pitched, did you just solve all of the requests for it? Or did you ask, hey, look, we've got something that's 95% good enough for this, but it's 10 times simpler? Because a lot of times PM will work with you and say, no, we don't actually need that thing, or we can do it in a different way and make this dramatically simple on the back end. And if you get that cycle relationship going with product managers, then the next feature they want is faster, and we spend less time on this one. Like it is, they can ship, okay, this feature is 95% of what I wanted, but over 3 weeks, I shipped 3 times as many features because they weren't complicated. And a lot of companies have yet to learn that lesson, I'm finding. And I wish it was more pervasive. And that manifests in performance, that manifests in simplicity and less tech debt and everything else.
Yeah, I love that advice.
But
Yeah, I think David pointed that out in the chat. Keep it simple, stupid. The KISS acronym that we've probably all heard of. I agree 100%. We've got another question here for Nick in the chat, and I was going to ask a similar question, so let's get this out of the way now. So, after you had converted to .NET Core, were there things that you took advantage of that .NET Core made available to you that weren't options in the past? An example would be using Linux servers, taking advantage of Docker. Were there things like that you started taking advantage of after the conversion?
Yeah, so I would say in progress, yes to some, yes to more coming up, right? So first we found out there are a lot of backslashes in our code. That sucked. We fixed that out. My kids are killing each other. So with the Linux conversion, do we want to run in containers? Maybe for production. There's two different sets of questions, right? Do we want to run at Stack Overflow scale in production, or do we want to run enterprise in containers, right? There's a couple of different deployment models. I treat the local dev environment as a fourth deployment environment for us, right? So we have Stack Overflow, public, large scale. We have enterprise, which is very private, single tenant, has channels or teams or channels, by the way. If I mix the two, that's the infrastructure name for teams, because everyone has a Teams product, I've learned. And then on we have local dev is also like another environment you got to deploy in and figure out, right? And it's more complicated, actually, I think, because if you have multiple scenarios you're deploying in, you have to be able to build and test readily, locally, and find a way that works. And actually, we're finding out a way that do that, which is to switch the environment, is less than ideal. We're actually questioning how we do that right now. So are we using Docker? Yes, because .NET Core lets us run on Mac OS. I have a MacBook, which will arrive in a week, so I can daily drive this thing. Dean Warren on our team did a whole lot of work porting to Mac OS. You can actually fully run the entire app with SQL, Elastic, Redis, and Docker, and then the core in the core app just on .NET Core, natively on Mac OS, right? You do not need parallels anymore. We used to be based on parallels for a long time. In production for enterprise, we're deploying in customers as like they have their own copy of the infrastructure, right? It's all isolated. Containers is beautiful there. If we wanted to do an appliance later, beautiful. Would we use it locally? No, because building a container is very slow, right? If you want to build and your cycle to like update a CSS file is to build a container, someone's going to come hurt me with a shovel. That's just not something that's going to fly. And then in production, we have a set of Windows web servers, right? We have 9 for production and then 2 for dev and meta, which is our like test and staging. And they're very low utilization, but we don't have U-turn space to like move to containers. And there's not a whole lot of advantage to it. Like we're beating up the bare metal, and it's very, very, very fast. There's not a whole lot of advantage to going to containers there unless it unifies something. If we were to move Stack Overflow to a cloud environment at some point, then we would reevaluate that, right? The main thing is porting .NET Core gives us options. And then there's other stuff in there, right? Like all of the new APIs for .NET Core, your read-only spans and these kind of things. We've started to move some stuff over, chuck out allocations, this kind of stuff. So definitely have taken advantage of some. Haven't gotten fully building on Ubuntu yet. We tried that, and it turns out it's like got a lot of edge cases. And then Dean asked around, and we're like, "Oh, no devs using Ubuntu. Screw that!" And then we just canned it. So seemed practical to me at the time. We may return to that, but basically, yeah, we can run on Mac OS now, and our designers love it because in parallels, I can build Stack Overflow and run it on my machine in about a minute, fully from cold to booted and running in the app, right? And if it's just a Delta build, it's like 8 seconds. In Parallels, it was 5 minutes.
Wow.
It is tremendously bad. Now, what we found, this was like an epiphany we had the other day, which means we're just, at least I'm an idiot. We were running SQL and Elastic and Redis inside Parallels. Well, Docker's been an option in macOS for a while, although it's been rocky, right? People have had pros and cons there. Now we can run it beside Parallels, not through that hypervisor, and the build times decrease 30 to 60% in Parallels. So it makes Parallels on the side for like just the Windows stuff you need to do very viable.
So you may have already mentioned this, but you mentioned your designers and developers. How big of a staff is it that works on Stack Overflow?
Oh God, I'm gonna get in trouble here. 50 people, 60 in engineering. It's not that many, and that's including PMs. And half of that is careers, like Stack Overflow / jobs used to be careers. It's called the talent and jobs. That's a group. We have the group that works on teams, which I think like 4 or 5 devs. And then we have the architecture team that I'm on. That's 5 of us total. It's 4 devs and Terrence, our DBA, me, Mark Gravel, Dean Worden, Samo Prolog, and Taryn Pratt's on there. And then the SRE teams. The SRE team, we just got back up to normal levels. I think it's 11 SREs right now. It's not a big org. We've never been that big. So that's the other reason to not make things real complicated, right? We don't have enough people to debug them.
So I was going to actually ask about the .NET Core real quick. So we've been talking about that a lot and how you've been kind of transitioning and some of the reasons behind it. And it's probably easy to assume that there's some huge performance gains for moving from the framework to .NET Core. So I noticed this giant monitor to your right, our left, that has a bunch of what appear to be interesting lines and colors. And is there anything in there that you could share with us that maybe some of the reasons, performance, things like that?
So to be super clear, performance was not a reason we moved at all. We did this pitch from so Mark Gravel and I are in the Microsoft MVP program, so we heard some of the .NET Core stuff a little earlier about how it was going and that kind of stuff. And so when this was first announced, we started gathering thoughts on it, and then when we could share them, we shared them and got clearance to. This was very, very early before they were like, sure, it's going to be a thing, right? So when we pitched the to management, basically, like, here's why we need to spend time on this, and as soon as we completed channels and teams and launched it, then we started .NET Core. That was like the next priority to go into, and it's testing and it's containers for enterprise. Performance is like number 20 on our list. It is completely fringe benefit, because in the .NET Core app for Q&A, which is the biggest, it's not the biggest CPU user at Cuban, it's actually dwarfed by other inefficient things on the box. It was at like 5% CPU before, 6% maybe, and so it was fine. Like, we didn't. .NET was already fast. It's all about how you use it, right? Some frameworks have floors to where below you can go in different scenarios. .NET Core, people were, we've heard on and off for years of this framework's slow or this one's not. I'm like, it's really how you use it, and that applies to every framework. In .NET Core, there is a performance gain. We're at peak traffic about an hour ago, and it's currently at 2.8% CPU on average across the boxes. It's just like, it tickles kind of levels, right? It just doesn't even care.
I like that. It tickles.
Yeah, it's great. So where performance helps a lot is actually in where the framework got better in ASP.NET, especially had all these allocations. So for example, if you go to a URL in ASP.NET and it's like /A/B/C/D/ an ID or something, right? That's 5 strings. It allocates because it slices the URL up and it allocates those strings every single request. Plus, it puts mscorelib.dll's full name in there like a bajillion times. We never found where that came from. So we would see in memory dumps all of this garbage from Gen 0, and it's I call it the fog of war. You actually cannot see what your problems are, because once you get decent, the framework's like the top 50, right? And as soon as we went to .NET Core, we started doing memory dumps, and we're like, wow, look at all our stuff up top. That's beautiful. Now we can actually optimize this thing. We were used to be 50th on the list. Now we're like 3. And after porting to .NET Core, we had Mark Gravel take a couple of weeks and port one of the main /users on Stack Overflow. Worked in a specific way with a specific cache with an array of structs, which was just large object heap kind of stuff.
Yep.
And we instantly, the large object heap was 6 gig about 3 weeks ago now. Now it's about 600 meg to a gig, and there's more we can trim off. So just boom, 80% of the large object heap, right off top, just because we could see it. So some of that stuff's very cool. Plus, if your memory dump's smaller, right, you can analyze it faster. You can do all this stuff.
So I'm picturing like an awesome feature image for a blog post that is the fog of war and .NET Core, allowing you to see through that.
Flashlight. It is. It's hugely helpful. CPU and stuff, it's down. There's all these. So what you're seeing right here, you want me to screen share? Can we hook that up?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's take a closer look.
Let's try. Come on, Skype. Come on. There we go. All right. Let's see. Does this work? Tell me if that lights up on your end.
We got it.
All right. So up here is, so what these are is this is coming from a library called StackExchange.metrics. This is open source. It's on GitHub under our org, and this is a alpha version currently in Stack Overflow. It's been running fine for a week. We'll make it stable and deploy it probably this week, next week. It's just a next on the list kind of thing. So what this is there are counters in .NET now and things at the base level that are exposed from Kestrel, from so what happens there's something called an ETW, which you're a hardcore performance dev, you've probably been into this. It's basically event tracing in Windows, where it writes out what's going on, right? When a GC happens, what CPU levels are at, this kind of stuff. The problem is when you go cross-platform, you kind of don't have Windows anymore, and that's gone away. So they had to re-engineer it and build something into .NET Core itself. So a lot of this, when they did that, David Fowler and some of the other devs pushed for having metrics exposed and where you could read them. So it's called event source and event listener. So you can hook up to these and just collect them and do whatever you want with them. Stack Exchange Metrics just does all that for you. So it's just a wrapper library of what's in the framework, and plus you can add your own counters and things, right? So this will be available soon. Again, Dean will do a nice blog post on this. All of these metrics that you're seeing are built in the framework. None of these are custom. And by plugging this in one way, it's just a couple lines of code in each app to get all these base metrics. We can quickly, so this is like the core QA app. This is the main application for all of Stack Overflow and all SE sites. I can quickly come up here and change it. Skype is really screwing with my clicker. Wow. Apply. Okay. So here's sockets, right? Like this is the WebSocket server, and you'll notice the CPU on this is like it literally will not round to 0.5% because it's so low. It just it's
That's amazing.
The fidelity is 0.5% CPU, and it just won't go up. So some of this stuff is just insanely efficient, and you'll see like concurrently there's 70,000 WebSockets per server, or sorry, concurrent requests, because WebSockets are long lived. And if I switch back to Core QA here, and you see everything's very smooth, right? And it's low GCs. These are like 0.0 GCs a minute, right? It's just very, very low. And if I go back to Core QA, which is doing a little more activity, then you'll see the concurrent requests in and out are like 5, 10. This is how many requests are like, you take a snapshot in time, how many people are in the pipe in the web server, right? Yeah. If you're very, very fast to go in and out, that number is very low. Your concurrency is low. And that's how we operate. The moment this stops being true, we fall right over. It does not. Our infrastructure is based on low latency and going very, very, very fast. And when that stops happening, it's like a tanker truck on a highway wrecking and just blocking all 4 lanes, right? If everyone goes 5 miles an hour, the highway just piles up in a hurry, and all the on-ramps on the highway, right? So you're talking about the app stalls, connection pools from more requests coming in that want to get a connection. That connection pool's full. Requests are full. Now your thread pool starts filling up. Now your sockets start filling up. Now your load balancer can't reach that web server because it's out of sockets. Now your health checks to the world go down, right? So it very quickly becomes catastrophically bad whenever you have pileup like this. So this is something we keep an eye on for sure.
So you mentioned, David Fowler, and you talk about WebSockets here. Are you guys actually using SignalR at all for Stack Overflow?
No, don't hurt me, David. We built something a long time ago called NetGain, which is very, very efficient. SignalR has a lot of features that we don't need, so therefore it is heavier than we need. We, again, keep it stupid simple, right? For WebSockets in Stack Overflow, we don't need authentication. We don't need back and forth. Basically, you on a web page, so the WebSockets for SO, if you don't know, you can see the vote counts update live, or the numbers in your top bar come live. That's WebSockets.
Yep.
So when on a page, you can dial in, and you will see that you subscribe to these channels. There's a channel for a question, for votes on that question. There's a channel for your account, which is all your top bar stuff. And that's all it is. And you've registered for events. And then the WebSocket server, we pub sub to Redis when things happen. And each WebSocket server is listening to Redis as a subscriber, and it just loops through its list of clients and is like, does anyone need this? And if so, it sends the frame down to you. Very, very simple architecture. And so in .NET Core, we actually threw away NetGain, and this is using the built-in WebSocket bits in .NET Core, the
okay,
website
got it.
class. So it's a lot simpler. It's not quite as memory efficient. There's still a little more stuff we don't need, but it's so much easier to maintain. We're like, yeah, we'll eat the gig of memory. Like, it's just a no-brainer to just move over.
Awesome.
And most people aren't running 600,000 to 1 million WebSockets anyway.
Yeah.
We have WebSockets that we have a timer on them that we can poll the internet, and we don't get information from the machine, but it'll say when it was opened. And when we do that, we get WebSockets on web pages open 18 months to multiple years.
Wow.
Statistically, someone has probably died and left a web page open. Like, just if you, it's ridiculous how long some of these durations are, right?
Oh, that's amazing. They just have it open all the time, right?
Yeah, because we don't need to. We actually, so the WebSocket bits, we open multiple ports on the web server because the problem is not scale. You see CPUs like nothing on that view I showed you. The problem is port exhaustion.
Yeah,
that's the only problem, and it'll make a load balancer. So one of the things I'm going to talk about, spoiler alert for anyone watching my talk at Stack tomorrow. There was one time Mark built WebSockets, and we didn't fully appreciate how much load this was, and it renegotiated all the TLS streams because it's SSL. Our WebSockets are SSL. Everything's SSL, right? Yeah. WebSockets go to one load balancer, and when it renegotiated all these connections, and we didn't at that point in time have a back off. Now, if you disconnect, we randomly make you wait 1 to 2 minutes, I think, or sorry, 0 to 2 minutes in seconds, and we reconnect. So it's a little staggered. Was not staggered at that point in time. So basically, if you built the WebSocket servers, and it's a very simple app, right? So it deploys very, very quickly. You've basically instigated a massive DDoS against your infrastructure instantaneously. You just say, like, give me a 500,000 connections, like that. And SSL takes a little bit of CPU to compute that key negotiation, right? So it slammed the CPU, it slammed the sockets, and in that case, there's offloading on the NIC. It literally melted the network card. There was silicon destroyed on that. The server was fried. We had to go replace the network card after that build. And we've never built that quickly again for WebSockets. Like, some of this stuff is just like, what?
That's amazing.
Yeah, some of it's fun. Mark's like, it's kind of impressive when you do it, right? But...
So I actually have a question. If we shift gears a bit and talk more about actual data access and things like ORMs, I've heard you're using Dapper. But I've also heard rumblings that Entity Framework is being used as well. Could you talk a bit about why both are being used, and when you would choose one over the other?
Sure. So we default to Dapper. We built Dapper. I'm not going to act like we're not biased. What we found, the reason Dapper exists is Link to SQL used to have these internal locks at various places, and we would see a page that normally takes 20 milliseconds or 30 milliseconds back at that point take 400. And you couldn't explain it. And that's actually one of the reasons Mini Profiler was created, because we had to witness these stalls in the page when it happened. And so Mini Profiler was actually built as a way to prove Jeff Atwood wrong. Because he said, this page is slow or this page is fast. And we're like, you're full of crap. It's because you're in California and the data center's in Oregon. And then so they finally put a timer in the page. And they're like, the group agreed that they want a number to look at. And then they went, damn, he's right. So that didn't work out. But now we got Mini Profiler to look at this stuff. So Link to SQL led to Dapper for a very, very fast ORM for reading. Not so simple inserts, right? Simple inserting a single entity, not a tree of stuff, okay? Now you go to make a post. Say if you're a new user to Stack Overflow and you sign up. When we make a post and put it in the database, there's a post, there's post history, there may be some other things to go with it, little child objects, right? I don't want to build that big map of stuff to put in the database. Entity Framework does that. Link to SQL did that. There's no reason for me to build that, because if I built it, it'd basically be the same thing. So we use Entity Framework mostly for inserts, for very, very simple things, and Dapper for reads is the predominant usage. Things that are very, very simple and standalone, we use Dapper for both. But if you take so a good example is on Stack Overflow with the network, you can take a question that doesn't belong on this site. Say if you ask a cooking question on Stack Overflow, you got really lost, right? We want to move that question over to cooking.stack exchange. We basically take that post and everything about it, comments, answers, users, all this kind of stuff, votes, and we package it up, that object tree, in protobuf. We just make a big old zip, and then we send it over to the other site via an API call, and it just extracts that thing into the Entity Framework object model and just inserts it, and it takes care of all the ordering and everything. There's no reason for me to build that, especially because that's not a perf-sensitive path for us. We are going to make some optimizations there, but remember, Stack Overflow is 98% read. We don't like that's where to spend your time investing, right? What is your main use case? Don't a lot of people like to grind their gears on a 1% case. It's great, but unless that 1% is very important, like it's the CEO's business report or something, right? Typically, that's not where you need to spend your time at scale.
Right.
So yeah, we stick with what works. And Entity Framework is the simplest thing that works. We're on 2, not 3 yet. We haven't done that move. We just need to dedicate some time to testing a little bit because of they do client-side evaluation if what you have can't translate to a SQL query. And so since that's the case, we need to be careful there. We did have an outage based on that one time, which I could cover if you want. Basically, SQL's happy to saturate a 20 gig network connection if you give it a bad enough query.
We'll take your word for
wait. How bad a query are we talking about?
Well, so we had a GUID for a thing, and it didn't translate the GUID to, it was like where GUID equal, and it didn't translate to SQL like it did in Link to SQL. And this was on StackExchange.com. So if you go to StackExchange.com and click on your user, if you're logged in, you can see all your posts from across the network. There's a table we aggregate titles, not bodies and all, into, and some other things. And what it would do is it couldn't translate that to SQL. So it's like, no, don't worry about it. I'll just pull all the results that match the rest of the query, and then we'll filter by this. Now, the problem is that's about 140 million posts. So every time someone loaded the page, it would stream 140 million posts to the web server, and then it would client-side sort them. And everything was fine. Like I said, it's very efficient, right? CPU's low, memory's low. We couldn't figure out what's wrong. And then Shane Madden, one of our SREs, looked at the network, and he's like, wow, SQL's using 20 gig exactly on the network. It was just saturating just as fast as it could, because we're on memory and NVMe SSDs. So it was happy to, at low CPU, to just flood the network and then run out of bandwidth. It couldn't actually ACK requests coming in for connections and things. So Taryn and I are over here just killing SQL SPIDs, like kill it while we roll back. So, there's lots of things. The talk I'm doing tomorrow on various ways we've attacked ourselves, we will hopefully be able to edit and make public. There's a couple things we can't share, but I'm hoping most of it, because I couldn't stop giggling writing it.
So we've got SQL Server saturating the network connection. We've got what was it that caused the network card to physically melt?
WebSockets. Don't reconnect to 500,000 WebSockets at once. That's what we learned. Not a good idea.
We actually have another question in the chat that we should get to here. And the question is, are you using machine learning on the back end for your operations, or on the front end in features users interact with?
Ooh, so this is a question I would definitely pose to Kevin Montrose or Jason Punyon, our current data team. Yes, I couldn't dive into details on it, but so things like comment classification, where we try and flag unfriendly comments as quickly as possible. We want to make it a better environment. Those get uploaded to an Azure bot that we have because we need Python and GPUs, and it was the quickest way to set it up. Like I said, we don't have a lot of infrastructure. So that bot runs to classify comments kind of continuously. And that is a machine learning kind of trained model. There's some other stuff we do. That's the one that comes to mind. But if you pose that to Jason Punyon, would be or Monty, that's who can answer it better. I'm just not an expert in that area. That's their dedicated bits. I just hope their servers not fall over when we run something. Hopefully.
Nice. So I shifting gears back to the topic of Dapper. I know we talked briefly before the show that your team had built some analyzers for using with Dapper, specifically for SQL Server, it sounded like. Could you talk a bit more about what those analyzers are doing for you?
Yeah, this is something we'd love to package. I don't know that we can release it, and it's totally a technical limitation. So in Dapper, if you have like a variable, right, you're writing a SQL query and you say select star from users where ID equals @ID. A lot of devs don't realize till they trip on it, like that ID may or may not be case sensitive, right? So if you have @uppercase I, lowercase d, and then a parameter that's @lowercase ID, that will work on your server if the master database is case insensitive. It will not work on your server if the database is case sensitive. It actually matches. The downside of flipping that on its head is if you had multiple variables, they wouldn't, there's a problem in both directions. We're case insensitive, but we still might like to trip on it. And plus, you just want to see if you're just missing a parameter period at compile time. So what Samo built was an analyzer that takes the T-SQL parser, and this runs for our entire solution when we build in a couple of seconds, so it's well worth it. And it parses the query, and then it gets all the parameters it's expecting, and then we compare that with what's passed in. And that's not just new object. That's if you pass a POCO or whatever, it will check all the things because Rosalind's got the whole tree, right? It's a very good place to check it. So at compile time now, we will see that you're missing a parameter or the casing's wrong or whatever, right? And the complication with releasing that thing that Sam was trying to ask some questions, analyzers can't have references. So he would have to package the T-SQL parser. Well, it's not Dapper. It's Dapper on SQL Server specific. That's one thing. And then the other is you can't. The only way that works in our solution is to package the T-SQL bits inside the DLL. And I don't think license-wise we're able to do that, right, and release it. So it's actually a technical limitation of what your analyzers can rely on as to why that would be. We're trying. I know Samo's poked Jared Parsons and some of the Rosalind team to see what we can do there. So that's going to be interesting because we could, you could get one for MySQL or whatever. People could build these, but super useful.
So just let me jump in here. So for our viewers that are unfamiliar, what exactly is Dapper?
Dapper is, I can't say micro ORM. It accesses your database. There's like debates on what an ORM is, right? Whatever you think an ORM is, rock on. We don't really care. Dapper is a rapid deserializer, so you can do query of object or query async or query first or default, all these different common operations against ADO.NET, right? So like a DB connection or an IDB connection. So SQL Server connection, Postgres, MySQL, Oracle. Oracle's a little funny. Some of those, all of the ones that implement ADO.NET, you can use Dapper on. And you put the raw text of your query in. It's not made to generate queries. It's not what it does. It does not take an object where, and make a query. It's you write the SQL, and then you pass in the parameters you want, and you get whether it's an object or nothing, and it will deserialize it back into whatever POCO you've passed in, right? It's like query of T. So if, for example, query of user, select star from users where ID equal or where type equal, you get a list of users back or a single user back. And it hydrates your object. It's very simple, it's very clean, and it's very, very, very fast. Most of the perf we found lately, we talked with the EF team about how to improve all the layers here. EF Core is getting closer and closer to Dapper on deserialization because a lot of the fruit, so to speak, is down in the providers now, right? In ADO.NET and in the SQL client, these kind of things. So we're looking at them, nothing to share there yet, but we're talking with them about how do you improve that. Because for us, reading things off SQL, the Stack Overflow question page, for example, we cache very, very little. We're about to cache even less, and we're reading every single page. We query the answer, the questions, the comments, the votes, the users, part of the sidebar, the top bar, your user up top, all that's every single page load. We hit SQL, 6, 7 times to 10 times, depending if you're a mod, and Redis every single load. And so making that faster is something we very much are interested in. But Dapper helps us do that, right? Because there's some control down there.
So it almost sounds to me like this is the functionality that the ADO.NET should have had to begin with.
Yeah, ADO.NET was it was designed at a certain point in history, and then use cases on top of it differed over time, right? ADO.NET does these bits. It's just a lot more verbose to do all of the stuff. You make a command, make your parameters. Yeah. Dapper will do all of that for you, right? Think of it as an ADO.NET wrapper to make a lot of common operations more convenient while still being fast.
Okay, well, thanks for that digression, humoring my question there. So, Dave, you were gonna ask another Dapper question?
Not a Dapper question. I was just gonna ask to see if you could actually share some code or something that you're working on, maybe something that's not, secretive or private. And I'm curious to look at some of the cool things that your day-to-day.
I don't know that we have anything interesting, to be honest. Like, our code is not special. That's what people tend to think, like we have these magical tricks. Just do it simple. I think that's what confuses a lot of people looking at this stuff, is that we don't do anything. We have some patterns that we do, and we try and release those as libraries, right? Whether it's mini profile or SC Redis, like we built a Redis lib and then we open sourced it, right? We built Dapper and then we open sourced it. The things that are common are kind of out there. Some of the things that are interesting that maybe is not apparent, but it'd be really hard to walk through the code because they're sufficiently complicated. But things like get set, right? So here's a trick for people. People have things in cache. The thing is, when they fall out of cache, you hit a wall of perf, right? So you go to a web page and something's cached for 5 minutes. The first person in caches it, and they waited for it to get in cache synchronously, right?
Yep.
And then 5 minutes later, it falls out, and then everyone at the door waits again to get it in cache. Especially if you're coming like spinning up the app from a load balancer. Maybe you have 1 or 2 people the first time because you are just came up. You're in a health check, right? And then the second time you're mid-run and you got 200 people waiting on that cache. That's bad. It's very, very bad. And your connection pools, your thread pools, all that explode because it's this very simple concept, right? So one of the things we built a long time ago, and we have to figure out how to open source this because the contexts are very tied to our code. But we have something called a get set because we suck at naming as much as everybody. So what a get set does is it gets it and sets it asynchronously if it needs to, right? So to explain how that works, say you have a fresh and stale TTL, and the total TTL of a memory cache is the combination of both of those. Okay, so I want to cache it for 5 minutes, and after 5 minutes, I want a new value. But you're a 98% read app. You're not a bank. Let's pretend Stack Overflow is not a bank because we're really not. Like if you loaded the page a second earlier or a second later, would it matter? Not unless it's got your content on it, right? Like a post you did and it's not there. That's the only time it would matter. We're not talking about that. We can clear the cache in that case, right? So if after 5 minutes, I would like to serve you quickly but not blockingly, why can't I give you that value for another couple seconds or even another hour if things went terribly wrong, right? And everything fell off. So after the freshness expires, the first person coming in past freshness takes a lock and they kick off a background refresh of that value that does not block you. This is critical, right? So instead of any kind of pile up or any kind of stalls, as you see in your graphs, you keep the traffic very, very fast and moving through. And every 5 minutes, someone might get a value, typically 0 to 0.5 seconds stale, because those fetches are typically very, very fast, right? So this very, very simple concept is something we'd love to be able to open source, but it doesn't really, like you need your context of like, hey, what common things do you need to fetch and store stuff in the background? For us, it's a data context from EF Core, which is just, we use it for connection most of the time. It's which site you're on because we're multi-tenant. And that stuff doesn't matter for most people, right? It's something very, very tied to us, but it'd be nice to make it generic and pull it out. And there's an async version of it too, right? So some things like that I think are very interesting and people don't think about. They're like, oh, it's cached, and they test it and it's cached. What they're not seeing with monitoring is that when that cache falls out, very, very bad things happen to perf, right? You just hit these walls and you'll see connection pools spike and thread pools spike and all this kind of stuff. I'm not sure how to share that readily, but it's more of a description of the problem, right?
Yeah, conceptually that's really interesting. I think it's totally valid.
I'm trying to think of what else we do. We're really a lot more boring than people think.
Well, well, I know I follow you on Twitter, and there's always interesting things because I'm kind of really excited about C#, the language, and the advances with that. And I know that a lot of times you'll put kind of feeler tweets out there about how
bad ideas.
No, well, right. How the team is debating, and I think it's a valid point. Like, right, the team will debate various, pros and cons of readability and stuff like that. So, is there anything that you can speak to about where you guys are leaning and what things you like and don't like?
Yeah. So one of the things we're looking at right now, we're not there yet. We're working on this, and I need to pick it back up. We have a team meeting with all the people who work on we call the core product, the Q&A shared environment. That repo is the formerly Core is the name of it. We have a meeting every Tuesday with all the dev teams that go on that for like 30 minutes. Quickly, what are you doing? What do you got out? Right? It's like weekly. I don't know. People to say a Scrum and Agile or whatever. Do what works. I don't care. Right. We're just, our teams are flexible, but we sync up, right? Yeah. Each team does what works for them. So when we do that, we say like, okay, we ported it to Dotnet Core. The reason we haven't done format on save like to be just brutally honest, and they can kill me if they want. Razor sucked at this, right? You would save, and you could use Razor's white space as a random number generator for SSL certs. Like it would just do random crap, right? It would just space things over and put braces. You're like, what's going on? Now with the new Razor, like if you hit save, it consistently does the same thing. So what we want to do is do format on save for everybody. But before we do that, we need to say, okay, here's what we want to go with, and then do one big everyone hates this entry and get pass at it, right? Everyone, like, you go to get blame, click past this one. You don't want 20 of those. Like, bundle them all up. So you're like, you could just have a commit called ignore this with no functional changes, and you can just like, okay, go one more back and blame. You got to eat it. Just eat it simple as possible. So what we want to do is get all of the things like, do we want to use var using? Do we want to use switch expressions? Do we want to use this kind of stuff? And I don't have strong opinions, and it doesn't matter what they are if I did, right? I like switch expressions. They're great. var using, pros and cons, depending on what you're doing. These kind of things are not one person. It is a team. What works best for the team? But it is best to decide on a convention if you can, because then tooling can enforce it, right? The PR check could enforce it. It becomes something you stop discussing and just works. And that's a huge time saver. That's where we're aiming for. It's not about what we're doing. It's that you just stop spending time on it. White spacing, where the braces are, just agree on it and move on. For 10 years here, our conventions are simply Visual Studio defaults, hit save.
Yeah.
What
about tabs versus spaces versus semicolons?
Well, now you're trying to start a war.
Tabs are the devil. There's different, right? There's an accessibility argument for tabs. I haven't seen it. I've seen it somewhat incoherently made and not on screen readers, which is worth considering. So I'm not as dismissive as I used to be about screw tabs. But we use spaces, and we do heckle people for putting tabs in PRs, of course. Yeah, it's interesting because there's an accessibility argument that I hadn't considered until like last year. Somebody made very good points about how screen readers work and how they could adjust it and how it reads it properly, and I was not aware of that. And just to be honest, if we had a dev that was in that position and needed it, everyone would be willing to change tomorrow. It's just not something we have spending time on because from our code base perspective, it's not affecting anybody. And so going with the default of tabs and that kind of thing. But if someone had a problem with it, we would, like, no one's got, I'm hanging on to this for dear life kind of stuff, opinions about anything, which is good. You need to be that flexible, I think, to be on teams cooperatively.
So I've got some questions just more generally about like the workflow for Stack Overflow. And you mentioned there's like 50 to 60 engineers. What size teams do you have?
So the team is about 5, architectures 5, SRE does not commit to that code base. We do have a lot of infrastructure as code, right? DNS is deployed as code. Our switches are deployed as code. Actually, a little too well. We found out in a call before this. It enforces a thing we would like to turn off to debug a support ticket, and we're like, it's so ingrained into enforcing the correct behavior, the module does not allow us to turn it off. It's kind of like, Shane Madden, if you're listening, good job. You really enforced the hell out of that. There's the careers team is, I think, 2. There's like jobs and talent, but it's one code base. They're like 11, 12 engineers, but like 5 and 6 or something. So small teams, and it's PMs, it's Scrummy, or Agilely, or I don't know. Honestly, like, you'd have to give me a dictionary to tell what Scrum is. It's Kanban-y, probably.
It's Kanban-y. I like that. Kanban-ish.
We've moved to Jira. I don't care what platform you use. We were on Trello-ish, Jira-ish, Azure DevOps-ish, for like the boards and all. All of them suck. All of them are good. All of them integrate with different things. Pick your poison. It doesn't matter to me. Just get your teams on one of them. And which we've done recently with Jira. We just had somebody come in and say Jira, and everyone hopped on Jira. We're like, great, we could stop talking about that, move on. And you can see each other's tickets and things, right? Before it was like, where the hell is this team's bug board?
I feel like I've been on a lot of teams lately that are they've adopted agile processes, but they're not so hung up on the terminology, or not so hung up on the ivory agile tower, as it were.
Yeah, and I haven't met 5 people describe it the same way anyway, right? It's like, what is DevOps? It's got a room of 200 people. You're going to get 196 answers.
I was really thrown off when I first started working for Microsoft because some of the folks out west at Redmond, they call Kanban Kanban, and I was like, "What is that?"
You mean it's not?
I worked for a company that made pool pumps, and they did injection molding and stuff, and that's the first time I had heard Kanban was there, and I just assumed they said it correctly.
No, I'm like seriously, like I've been pronouncing it wrong this whole time.
Well, I've always called it Kanban. Yeah, I don't know.
It's a ban on aluminum soda cans, right? That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, it works.
I actually had a question for Nick. I have it in my notes here. So in terms of adoption of .NET Core releases, how is it that your team determines whether you go with a current release or a long-term support release? How is that decision made?
Oh, that's an interesting question. We were on 2.2 and we moved to 3 and 3.1 because we are moving SO over. So typically you move a solution at once at least, right? So we're a little weird because we're bare metal and we have our own build agents. Upgrading the build tooling is actually the most painful part of an upgrade, because if you're just building on someone else's stuff like Actions or Azure DevOps or Travis or TeamCity or whatever, and you're using their agent and their config, that's one set of like, okay, I just built whatever SDKs are installed, or I asked them for new ones, right? If we have to deploy new build tools and SDKs, and you have to have the build tools right now to build ASP.NET MVC apps. Now, once you're on .NET Core and you've got everything moved over, then you just need the SDK. That's a game changer, because I can just Puppet Chocolatey install that thing, or I can just SSH into the thing or whatever to get the agent updated to the SDK, right? We can patch a CVE with one version change in Puppet and just let it run, and it will build out the next time, right? Right now, there's a couple things. We're on IIS, which means it's got the hosting module. That is not trivial to update in a shared environment, because there's a blip to it. So you can't just say, hey, Puppet, go, because it might take the whole web tier down at once, right? Not that. And then things you learn the hard way for 500 Alex. The long-term thing is an interesting question, because I don't think it's really mattered to us until 5 is coming along, right? We want some stuff from 5. And I think every decision you ever make, including where you spend your time or not doing something, is a trade-off. Every moment of your life is a trade-off. For long-term service, is there something in there you want? Or is there something in there you would like to fix, right? And I say that not that something is currently wrong, but something may be wrong, right? If that's the case, we're at scale. We have a lot of requests and not a lot of infrastructure. There are pros and cons to this. I'm not saying like, hey, we do a lot with a little infrastructure, right? I said when we slow down, we fall over. That's a downside, right? There's pros and cons to all this stuff. So if there's something that comes up and we need to fix it, being on the current version of .NET, like 5, is going to be a lot easier to get fixed, even if we need to build it ourselves, than .NET 3x. And because we push a lot of traffic through not a lot of hardware, we're more likely to hit some case like that where we need to go fix the framework for some reason, right? It hasn't happened a lot. We haven't needed to build .NET Core. We try and test the previews. I do wish testing the previews was easier to do the build tooling and things, right? Right now, if you look in .NET 3.0 and 5.0, the default behavior is to build on the latest SDK on your machine. So if I just install the preview, then I am building on the 5.0 preview SDK, which may have some breaks. I mean, it's a preview, right? Against all of my stuff on the machine. I have to go put a global JSON in every single thing to opt out of using a preview. Like, no. I want to play over here with my personal projects or with a branch, but I want all the production stuff to be stable on stable, even if it's LTS or not. I just want it to be on stable, right? And that story, I think, is not perfect yet in .NET. They're still trying to figure out, how do we get people to test previews and do stuff like this? And I really wish a preview release was opt-in, but I get how their numbers would just completely tank from testing if it were opt-in, right? Just like anything. It's a difficult position. I do not envy. I think Kathleen Dollard works on mainly is over this area, and it's a really hard set of constraints. There is no good answer, right? But right now, what we do is we've now rolled out global JSON to say don't do preview for all of our stuff so that we can test 5.0. Now, what we're doing right now, my team and some from SRE are testing moving from TeamCity to GitHub Actions. Package feeds are a little diplomatically to be desired. We're finding with authentication and things, NuGet authenticated feeds have never been that great of an experience. Unauthenticated, they work fine. So in GitHub, it's authenticated. I think they're working on removing that in some cases. We would like to move to GitHub Actions and get out of the build server business, right? If we can do that. And so the first step is our NuGet packages, that kind of things. Once we're there, testing a preview becomes 10 times easier to me. And in that case, we would absolutely stay on, I think, non-LTS, just whatever the major version is. Because when you just weigh all the things, for us, it makes sense. If I was running a 24/7 critical app for emergency department, I don't know if I'd make the same decision or not, right? What are your pros and cons? I think everyone's got to choose that, and there is no really right answer for that. If you're not actively working on the app and it's very, very, stationary, I'd probably stay on the LTS if I were making a decision, right? If I'm on something active development, I would be on the latest. Yeah.
Cool. Well, this has been great. I know that we're getting close to our time. Actually, we're at our time box. So I just want to take a moment to thank Nick for joining us today. And
Well, Dave, who do we have next week?
actually, let me pull up.
I can tell you. It was a trick question.
No,
I already have it queued up.
You already have it queued up.
Yeah, I was teeing it up for you and you missed it, dude. It's Corey Weathers.
Corey Weathers.
Ooh.
Corey Weathers from Twilio. Yeah, so we're super excited about Corey. I had to open up the schedule, so we've been building a website to host our schedule, to share it out. And Nick, you were probably one of the first official users because you did the checklist from the website. So awesome.
Except the reboot.
And I'm going to blame that for losing your camera feed midway through the show.
Yes, yes.
Well, thank you again, Nick. This was amazing, and I hope all of the viewers got something out of this this episode.
Sure, happy to. It's fun. I appreciate being invited.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week with Corey Weathers on the .NET Docs.